yell at me. Kim Ogg was elected District Attorney of Harris County effective January 1, 2017. A nationally recognized victims' rights advocate, as District Attorney, she is committed to more effective criminal justice and treatment of every individual with dignity and fairness. Upon taking office, DA Ogg immediately placed public safety paramount among her guiding principles. At the forefront of her administration, DA Ogg emphasizes collaborative efforts between the Harris County District Attorney's Office and local law enforcement to narrow the focus of police and prosecutors alike on the violent offenders who pose the largest danger to the public. Licensed by the State Bar of Texas in 1987 and recognized as a specialist in criminal law by the Board of Legal Specialization since 1992, DA Ogg has a track record of public service and 30 years professional experience to rely on as she works to reform the Harris County criminal justice system. A native Houstonian, DA Ogg received her law degree from South Texas College of Law, Houston in 1986, and her undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Texas at Austin. Please welcome our super duper District Attorney, Kim Ogg.
We got to move the commas around in that introduction. We threw Larry. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Kim Ogg. I'm your Harris County District Attorney, and I feel like I've been welcomed home. I'm a native, and I have known many of you in this room for decades. And for the electeds here, thank you for your service. Judge, thank you for the work you do in our JP court every day. These are the people's courts. They process thousands of cases, and they make your community safer. It is true that all politics is local, and the JP courts are the localest of our law and order and criminal justice system. So we have a prosecutor out there under Joanna Kraft, and it's, I just want to tell you, we appreciate the work you're doing. As far as the state reps, I know you're both home for a minute. So we wish you Godspeed up there, and I want to thank you both for a crime victims bill that was passed called Jenny's Law. We learned during campaign season that a rape victim had been jailed in pursuit of a conviction, and it led to discovering some important information, and that was that while this process was legal, it had a harsh impact on the crime victim, and that might have been assuaged a little bit if she had had a lawyer and there had been a hearing just to determine whether or not putting her in jail was the best solution to ensuring her return to court and her testimony. And there are many tools in our toolbox, and so that's a severe penalty. And so simply to give people in this situation access to a lawyer in an open hearing, what we call due process, the same rights that her rapist had, that's now what we have in Texas for crime victims. And during this time when sex trafficking is such a hot topic because we are a staging area, the biggest crossroads of sex trafficking in America, bills that protect crime victims, giving them simply basic equal rights, are very important. And it was a bill that was supported by literally everyone in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. It was signed by the governor. And so this was a bill that had not just bipartisan support, but nearly unanimous support. And I wanted to thank both of you for doing that, for all victims who may be, who are Texans, who may be engaged in the criminal justice system. I think it's really important. And while we thought of it as an isolated incident, it turns out that this practice is happening around the country. It's controversial, and it's important for communities to decide, is that the type of enforcement they want in their communities? So our community rejected that, and I appreciate y'all codifying that. I have been here in the Harris County area all my life. I've lived in many of the different neighborhoods in Houston, and I've been a lawyer for 30 years now. And let me just say, boy, that was a quick 30. Boy, And so I've had the opportunity as a Houstonian to see the peaks and valleys in our criminal justice system, what's happened with crime here in the county, how it's changed and morphed. And I want you to know that as taxpayers, having a criminal justice system that's flexible and up to date and responds to crime in the new forms that creative criminals are constantly crafting is important if you're going to be safe. And it is my duty as district attorney, the statutory duty says to seek justice. But I will tell you, paramount in my mission is to make you safe. That's the job of the district attorney. And while others in the past have never really correlated crime rates with leadership at the district attorney's office, I would tell you I do. I welcome that correspondence. I think that the policies of the top criminal justice official in the county matter, and that the crime rate is something we can directly impact through policies and the way we prosecute criminal cases in Harris County. So what is the job of the district attorney? Prosecute all criminal cases that happen in Harris County. But I will also tell you that this is a time when government is limited in our resources, when we are not simply able to write a blank check on the taxpayer dollar. It's a time when we have to prioritize our crimes and our resources if we're going to make you safe. And so I also ran on a platform of prioritizing crimes against people and property as our top priority. And why? Because we can't do everything well. And we need to do the dangerous things best. We need to remove the people who pose the greatest threat. And those are folks who are engaged in murder, rape, robbery, burglary. And then financial crimes. Financial crimes are, they pose a service gap here to the business community that is terrible. And I intend to bridge that gap. So one reason I am so happy to be in front of the Chamber of Commerce's safety group, and that's who you are, is that there is an absolute intersection between commerce, quality of life, a healthy economy in an area, and public safety. And the constables represent constables in the sheriff's department represent really, they're literally in that intersection. And what they spend their time doing and protecting you from affects your bottom line in business. That's what I would submit to you. And how we prosecute those cases matters to your bottom line out here. So when it comes to financial crimes, those have long been deprioritized, not just in Harris County, but by local criminal justice groups. Law enforcement's not in a position to go out and investigate complex financial crimes, but they impact our bottom line here. They cost jobs, they cost companies their reputations, and they allow criminal predators who are not prosecuted to re-victimize others when they leave a business, victimizing one and moving to the next victim. So financial crimes is an area that I think we have a direct responsibility to the business community at, and we want you to know we're focusing there. I'm populating those areas of our office. So the new district attorney's office has really two big divisions, operations and trials. Operations is our human resources, our security in our building, our IT, the financial engine that helps us with criminal forfeiture funds, helps us balance our budget, all of those things. And then our trial bureaus deal with all of the cases. And so the cases are what you mostly see in the newspaper and on the news. Somebody has committed an atrocity, or we've uncovered, or law enforcement's figured out a cold case. That's all trial bureau. But operations is actually our systems, and that's where savings and prioritization of expenditures occur. And that is your government at work. And so how we spend your money, meaning what we decide to prosecute matters. And our grade will be determined by the crime rate and whether or not we really help make you safer. And that's how we want law enforcement judged as well. I think that for a long time we've judged them on just number of cases. Justice by the pound is what I call it. And I think we've got to look for a more quality product. And that is why when we started rearranging the policies and making changes when I came in, law enforcement were the partners that we had to turn to and wanted to turn to first. Because while we live in one county, we have 90 different law enforcement agencies, all with their own administrative rules, none reporting to one particular leader or boss, all reporting to separate chiefs. And so it's important for somebody to take the lead in criminal justice if you're going to have a consistent application of the law in Harris County. And that's the job of the district attorney. So, what policies have you seen change in your community? What is the cost? What is the savings? And what kind of results can you expect? Well, the first thing we did is we eliminated the processing through the criminal justice system of about 10,000 misdemeanor marijuana offenders a year at a proposed savings of about $27 million a year. And we did that not because I can legislate, because I can't. I'm part of the executive branch. That's up to the legislature. But I can tell you that we are seeing diversion programs being used instead of jail around the country for a lot of reasons. The biggest reason in terms of the human toll in the criminal justice system is that it's, again, one of my strategies and guiding principles that we are safer when we keep people in the workforce. And if we criminalize and give people lifelong records for every law violation that they commit, especially when they're young, we disqualify a heck of a lot of our workforce. At 10,000 people a year, that's 100,000 in 10 years, right? Do the math. We're a city of county of 4.5 million. I think we're safer by keeping those folks in the workforce. And so what we're doing is diverting them. And we partnered with law enforcement to say, we believe our community would rather you spend the 4 hours that it takes or so, that it takes you to arrest somebody, process them, book them, take their contraband to the lab, then we think you'd be better off working on cases of violence against people and crimes against people's property. And law enforcement chiefs around the county agreed. And Mark Herman offered his support as the first constable in support. We met with everyone. We met with the chiefs of police of the school districts through the Greater Houston Police Chiefs Group. We met with all the constables, chief of police, sheriff, and all of us agreed we don't have the power to decriminalize anything, but we do have the power to send people to an alternative punishment. And so we're sending them to a class. And they have 90 days to take it, much like defensive driving. If they don't, a warrant issues. They can get the same result. They can go to jail. They can get a permanent criminal record, but now there's an option. So what are we going to do with the $27 million in savings? Well, it doesn't all go to just one place. Part of that calculation is the time that 10,000 officers spend arresting 10,000 offenders each year. Those officers, we hope, have some increased time to work on burglaries and robberies, because that is what is kicking our tail in terms of crime stats in this county. And the highest robbery stats are out on the west side and also up in Acres Home just south of you. But these robberies are deadly. Women are being targeted, people are being followed from cash businesses, storefronts. Our international community is being terrorized by robbers who believe that they're cash laden. And they wait for them outside of nail salons, they wait for their customers outside of hair salons, outside of small insurance businesses, and they trail you home, and they're killing people. And this is how your district attorney's office, this is what we need to be spending our time putting pieces together on, because what we need to be doing is called intelligence-driven prosecution, data-driven criminal justice system. Your money needs to be spent where your problems are. Burglaries aren't even being investigated. There's 1,200, not by other agencies, I'm sure they are in this area, but other agencies are strapped, and they're not. At HPD, they're just not being solved. The DNA that's being collected is not being tested. Why? Because we are a government of limited resources. Because in the modern world, the taxpayer dollar has to be used more efficiently if you want to be safer. That's why it's in my guiding principles. So we look at everything from a public safety view. We have to put it in the context of the bigger picture. Sex trafficking, testing rape kits, DNA. These are important evidentiary concerns that juries have come to believe exist in every case. Well, folks, they cost money. Labs are limited. I mean, it's, in a sense, government needs to operate more like business. Government needs to have accountability when it comes to the bottom line. And so balancing the budget is done in government by how we spend our dollars, because they're limited. County's not just going to let me keep writing checks. So these are how we are determining your dollars are best spent. Victims' rights, we've passed a law that ensure crime victims due process. But I want you to know that I think that serving our constituency is paramount in our goal. We should be serving crime victims with respect. We need to be looking at your restitution. We need to be trying to make you whole. We can do that without convicting every single person who does our community harm. Community service is something we don't see much anymore. When Tony Lawrence was sitting on city council, we used community service workers to paint out graffiti. We did it all over the county. We did it for free because they were paying their debt to you. We're going to do it again. That's how we're going to clean our waterways, our bios, and our green spaces. There's never been a focus on biking in this county. Pedestrian safety, vehicular safety. Let's talk about that a minute. Y'all have a heck of a bad problem out here. Every time I turn on the news, it seems like somebody is involved in a terrible collision out here. Late at night, often involving drunk drivers. Well, I want to look at the after-hours bars. We want to work with TABC, with ICE. We didn't need legislation to cooperate with the federal government. We've always cooperated with the federal government. They're a separate sovereign. And so it's useful to you in using your dollars to go after criminals as a collective, for us to work together. But we have to prioritize what we're going to work on. So when it comes to vehicular crimes, we worked with Bike Houston, to tell them and suggest to them that if they'll collect evidence, even on these harassment cases where people aren't following the city's 3-foot rules, that we'll help with that. We'll send warning letters that when somebody is injured or killed and the driver's identity is known, we'll investigate that. We'll charge them when we can. When I was the director of Crime Stoppers, the only crime we could never solve was failures to stop and render aid. And what we try to tell the public is, just treat the person you've hit like a human being. Stop and render life-saving aid. Call 911. You may not be charged with anything, but people, leave the scene of the crime and leave our fellow Houstonians, our brothers and sisters, to die on the streets like dogs. We can do something about that, and we are. Because Houstonians want more green space. They want to ride their bikes. People like to be outdoors, and we have a duty, and I think the ability, to make them safer. So, them is us. That's what's important to remember. I don't need to tell a safety committee that. What's coming in terms of what we're going to do about robbery and burglary? We're putting together a group of prosecutors in our Major Offenders Division, which is part of Special Crimes. It's the most prestigious area of our workforce. These folks are experienced prosecutors, and they are going to be dedicated to working robbery and burglary organized crime groups that are terrorizing our community and responsible for a disproportionate number of the violent crimes against us. Let me say, some people think of burglary as a benign crime. People who are willing to go in your home, regardless of whether you're there, they're willing to take your life in their hands, and I'm just not willing to take that chance. And burglaries are often committed by rings or crews of people working together. That is their full-time job. We need to put those people in prison. We need to work through the chain. So our lawyers are now being trained to work criminals at the low level up, to do what we call proffers of evidence. We can go easier on you if you will give us information about who you sell your hot product to, about who supported you in providing you this weapon, who gave you the information about the homes in a neighborhood. It's not rocket science. We can do a better job. We just have to dedicate the resources to it. It does take time. It only works one case at a time. Just like recovery. You know, criminal investigation has to be worked one case at a time. And so each lawyer has capacity for so many cases. That's our caseload. So it forces us to prioritize our time, and the courts to do the same. And I'd submit to you that this is good government. This is what you need to measure whether or not your government's working. I mean, I think we need more accountability from our elected officials now that I am one, not less. More transparency, not less. We work for you. That's what I tell my folks. As long as they're prepared, as long as they make evidence-based decisions, not based on who somebody's lawyer is, or who their daddy is, or who they know in our office, but based upon the evidence against them in their case, and what the victim thinks is a fair outcome, and what our community deserves in repayment. That's how we evaluate a case. And so as long as they're prepared, make evidence-based decisions, and are ethical, I'm going to back them up. Because that will be an explanation that I will be proud to give you about our 700 employees' responses to your cases. Now let me say, with 700 employees, our responses are not always consistent. And unlike the federal system, we don't have sentencing guidelines. So cases are handled differently, and results often are different. And so I want to tell the public up front that when there are results in criminal cases that you disagree with, that's your right as an American. It also ought to be your motivation to serve on juries and serve on grand juries. Because the community is who decides the outcome of criminal cases if we do it right. We don't decide who did it and make the evidence fit. We gather the evidence objectively, we look at it responsively, timely, we make decisions about what it logically draws a conclusion to, and we present that to the community. But the community gives us the jury results and the verdicts. You set the standards for what is acceptable behavior in Harris County. All government is truly local, it's us. So, the DA is to guarantee you the process. And I'm a big believer in constitutional rights. They are not technicalities. And that's why right here in my mission statement, we treat the accused with respect as well. Not more, not less than anybody else. Because their rights are our rights. And it took me a long time as a victim's advocate to see that if I wanted those convictions to stand up, and I wanted to bring real justice to a family who had been wronged, I had to ensure that the criminal was provided all his rights. And I gladly do that. So, these are the duties of your DA. I'm here to respond to you. I want to answer your questions. I want to tell you your taxpayer dollar is important to me. Your rights as victims are important to me. If you're ever accused of anything, your rights as an accused are important. And the community is owed some repayment. And so a community service program that is worthy of this city and the effort we're putting toward green space is coming. It'll be called Clean and Green. It'll be open to people who are charged with minor nonviolent crimes, and it will be a way for them to pay back our community to some degree for their unlawful behavior. And so that's what you can see coming in the near future. Our group working on robberies and burglaries will be announced later this summer. They're called a Crime Strategies Unit. These are new techniques, best practices that are being employed by other elected urban prosecutors around the country. And there's really nothing new in Houston that's not new elsewhere. We're fighting cyber crime. That's how thefts are committed. We're fighting sex trafficking and labor trafficking. That's the new widget. It's easier to smuggle than drugs and stolen goods because it's people. You can hold them for ransom. They're brutalized in the process. It is the ugly side of illegal immigration, and it is against the law. And sex trafficking, just punishing the buyers and sellers of prostitution isn't getting it. We've got to get to the kingpins, the shot callers, the people who are really making the money in this industry. And we're going to do that by working with and through the lower level criminals. So you can expect a higher quality of prosecution in Harris County, a case that is more significant because we're trying to get to the source of the problem. So these are the priorities. This is the vision for justice in Harris County. It's got to be equal. We've got to have a trustworthy system where evidence is properly collected, stored, transmitted to the DA's office, and then either kept or destroyed by us. And there's problems across the system. What you're not going to see from this district attorney's administration is finger pointing about who hasn't done what right. My thought is, let's look forward, let's work together to do it better. It's all our responsibility if something hasn't gone right in a case or in a system, and we can work together to improve it. So that's been the attitude, that's what I'm fostering among our lawyers, that all law enforcement deserves respect. No agency is going to be promoted over another agency, that at intake you should be getting equal time, and that your cases are important regardless of what agency you work for, especially school districts. Because that's where it all starts. He's got them at the gate. So these are some of my thoughts, and I think now maybe if it's okay with you, I'd be happy to answer questions, or if not, enjoy more of your coffee. And thank you again, Kelly, for sponsoring the breakfast. Way to go. We appreciate it. Community? Tony Lawrence. So she was on the board of Crime Stoppers. I recruited her. She hit the longest drive in the history of Crime Stoppers golf tournaments. I would not argue with her.
What can this area do as volunteers to help the DA's office out? Is there anything that y'all have organized or anything yet? Or would that be in the constable's office? Or
No, we'd be happy to have volunteers. I'll tell you what our Crime Strategies Unit is going to be working on with chambers and with management districts. Camera corridors. We recently had a murder of a friend of mine, Clint Greenwood. A prosecutor, a law enforcement officer working with Precinct 3 most recently. Let me just say, that felt like a kick in the face. I'd been in elected office about 3 months. I've known Clint for 30 years. We were in the same starting class at the DA's office. He started 6 months before me. Great person, assassinated by a disgruntled, probably mentally ill constituent who committed suicide shortly thereafter. These camera corridors, if we had had them, it took about a week with a huge task force of law enforcement resources. Officers from about 10 different law enforcement agencies work together out in Baytown. And they put together, in a sense, a patchwork of film of the suspect's car that eventually led to a camera shot of him at a local gas station. It took him a week. We're not CSI, folks. That's not reality. That's television. So, what happened over a week was that we were able to discover the identity of a person who already had been dead now for 6 days by the time we found out. That's 6 days that Clint's family waited in agony. So, we can do better than that. Our management districts already have cameras. You employ in the Chamber of Commerce membership of all your local businesses. Camera corridors are simply a network and a communication network that allows the people with the cameras to be contacted by law enforcement. If we narrow the contact person down to people in the DA's office or designated, we can have designated representatives within agencies. Such things as camera corridors are being used in other cities. That's smart policing. That's intelligence-driven prosecution. That keeps a family's waiting time from 6 days to much less. And what if he hadn't killed himself? He was an at-large person. We were very afraid down at the district attorney's office. There were a lot of people on his list. So, these camera corridors are something that I think that the chambers and the management districts could participate in starting right now. We could help you organize, and it will be for our robbery and burglary task force. Anytime we know we've got a departure, you know, we could check north and south on 610 at the intersection of Kirkendale. And this is how you get suspects. This is a smart use of your resources. This is partnering with our community.
What kind of volunteers could you possibly use? Because it would be like, I think would have to be already very well trained in your business.
You mean you're not a ninja?
I mean, okay, I'd say if I walked into your office and said I would like to volunteer, but I mean, you know, I have no training in your
Right. No, I don't think that's the option. I think that we intend to partner with our chambers and our management districts, and that this gathering of information about the cameras is something that's easily done through a chamber or a management district because you've already got contact with the members. You've already mapped out their locations. And then it's a matter of contacting new businesses with cameras or encouraging certain businesses in gap areas to employ cameras. They're a very inexpensive tool.
Okay, so it'd have to be volunteers that are already trained.
It would have to be volunteers through chambers that we partner with. But we can do that. I think that that's, Tony can organize that in 5 minutes. Tony?
Are you willing?
I'm calling Bob if not. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned the marijuana misdemeanor
Diversion?
treatment, the
Yep.
diversion program. Can you share a little bit about what is taught in those classes? What you know,
Yeah,
when
it's
they go
just
through
cognitive reasoning. It's a
Yeah.
4-hour class. It's live. It's taught by the deputy director at the probation department and individuals that they hire and train. And it's basically about decision making and about consequences of behavior and about behavioral change. It's nothing, it's again, not rocket science, and there's nothing magic about it. And whether it deters people or not, we'll see. I do have interesting numbers about who the offenders are. And I know that Precinct 4 has diverted 158 offenders. And so that's a lot of cost savings in terms of time for the cops. More importantly, maybe to our bottom line, it's a big savings at the lab, and it's a big savings in court time. The average age is 26, or that's the median age, because the offenders range from 17 to 72. Who has the Senior Living Memory Care Center? Let me just say, it's a great defense, I forgot.
Are there a limited number of times that somebody can be diverted?
There aren't right now, but there will be. We wanted to see if there were going to be actual serial offenders. Obviously, if you're waiting to take the program during 90 days, you get rearrested, you're no longer eligible. If you're on bond, you have a contract with the court not to violate any laws of the state, so you're not eligible. If you're on probation, you have a contract with the court not to violate the conditions of the probation, so you're not eligible. And if you're at school or in a school zone, you're not eligible because we recognize that that's an area that we want to give additional protection to. But in terms of the money that's being spent, let me tell you this. We had 118 adult rape cases filed in 2016. That's the last year before I took over. You think there were only 118 adult rapes here in Harris County? There were under 200 fraud cases filed at the DA's office. Do you think there were only 200 frauds? So we've got huge service gaps, and law enforcement isn't able to do it without us. So even where they've got resources applied in rape cases, in sexual assault investigation, we're not getting the return that we need if we're going to really make our communities safer. I mean, the CODIS database, where all DNA from felons is recorded at a national level and shared, is probably the greatest thing in crime fighting since cameras. And my thought is, we've got over 2,000 burglary cases, DNA evidence from burglaries sitting on a shelf that our county can't afford to test right now. So we can test for burglary DNA, or we can keep testing marijuana, 10,000 cases a year. And I think our constituents have spoken about that. I think it's pretty clear. It is always an imperfect solution. It is always an imperfect solution.
Question. This is not necessarily for you, but for all the law enforcement people, and you, Larry. The 1960 area has been swarmed with black and whites, DPS. So you'll see 4 or 5 of them in a row in a 200-yard span, and they're pulling people over left and right. So what those officers are saying is that they're there because of all the crime in the 1960 area. So does anybody know how is that coordinated with DPS?
Yes, the director of DPS, Sheriff Gonzalez, reached out to the director and talked. And clearly, we've got some issues on the 1960 corridor. The director of DPS has recently given us first 20 state troopers, and then he upped that another 20 to work the Cypress Creek corridor, Ella Boulevard, Kirkendall, these areas that are high crime areas. Now, previously, Captain Turner set up a robbery initiative, an anti-robbery initiative. Went very, very well. We've got another initiative planned that's going to go from 59 over to about Kirkendall. So it's going to span 2 sheriff's department districts. We're going to have District 1, which is here, District 2 involved. We're going to have approximately 60 state troopers involved. Precinct 4 is going to come aboard as well. And we're going to try to, as you're saying, address these crime problems and get some black and whites in the area.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think, we have had a lot of crime in this area, and there's a couple of things when you were talking about alternative programs or community service. It doesn't seem like it's a punishment, a 4-hour class. I mean, maybe it'll be effective in some cases, maybe it won't, but it sounds like a lot of these cases are pled down on punishments or there's nothing, and it never gets resolved. And I know in some of the cases when we speak with law enforcement in the area, we may have a video, we may have proof, and in some cases it's not that specific.
What kind of cases are we talking
Well,
about?
I'm talking about just neighborhood cases, car break-ins, people threatening in the neighborhoods, robberies and things. I've been told numerous times that the DA's office won't touch it. So
Won't touch what?
won't touch these cases.
Well, give me a specific. I can't
So-
deal with generalities,
No,
but you
just
give me
tell me.
specifics and we'll get it looked at.
Well, it's just when you call, you know, like when we have issues in our neighborhood, we will have someone from the infamous motel on video coming out of a specific room, coming into our neighborhood on video. We have robberies in our neighborhood all the time as a result of this. We have just random break-ins, you know, we have mail theft on video. I mean, we do have people on video, and I understand that a video is only useless if you find the person. In some cases, it's evident where they came from, you know. They came from that motel, you go find them at the motel. And someone just doing speeding in a neighborhood, things like that. They've just said that there's, you know, they won't even deal with those lower level cases. But it does affect our community, and in some cases, these people start escalating their crimes.
I don't know
So
who
what's the
they is,
solution?
but that's not true. Call intake, put the camera on. If you're law enforcement in this area and you have a case, call intake. Make sure you explain the facts fully. Ask for a specific charge. Know the law. If you've got a charge you want filed and there's some reason it's been declined that you think is not fair, call me.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, all I can tell you is I agree that low-level crime is important. Now, it's not as important as high-level crime, but it is often connected. And so, again, a variety of crimes that you've listed, we're dependent at intake. We have a 24-hour system. It's like an emergency room. And so we're dependent on the policeman on the street to tell us whether they want charges and to tell us what charges they want. If they convey that they don't want charges, often our lawyers will say, okay, we won't take charges. Sometimes there is a dispute of opinion. The officer wants charges, we don't. But I can tell you on marijuana, we just took a look at numbers and we decided we're going to divert them, period. And the diversion was a way to work them around the jail because it was so cost ineffective to punish them in that way, and it was not making us safer. We had no evidence to show that that large expenditure of money was really making us safer. So, trespass, criminal mischief, burglary of cars, we're all about, call us. We want those cases.
Well, to me, it's okay to divert, and you know, may not be worth your while with your numbers to send these people to jail, but there has to be a punishment that's a deterrent. It just looks like some of these just get brushed off, and the punishment is so simple, it's not going to deter them in the future because they're not suffering.
Right.
So
Again, call
there
us
has
on
to be a
specifics. In terms of plea bargaining, you just have to show me the specific case. Yes, ma'am.
If I'm understanding you correctly, you let me know. It seems to me, might be a little confusion here, that your description of the diversion program, based on what you listed, it did not apply to a repeat offender, somebody on probation, so on and so forth.
Yes.
So the diversion is really occurring, if I'm understanding it, with a broad variety age group that's a first offender, that first time, that kid that gets caught doing something, whether it's smoking, selling it, I don't know what gets them into that, but somehow a marijuana offense.
Right.
But this is a first offender.
It's not just first offenders.
It isn't?
It's not. But it is just the offense of marijuana. In other words, if you're caught with burglary tools or robbery tools, or you're a suspect in a more serious case, we're taking that case. If you're a habitual criminal, though, and all we catch you with is a joint in your pocket, nope, they're taking the contraband back to the office, they're tagging it, they're telling him, here's your paper, go to your class, he's signing it, and if he goes, great. If he doesn't go, there's a warrant for him. So it's not just first offenders, it is all offenders, but it is true they can't go over and over. I just didn't set a number because we didn't know how it was going to work. We didn't know how many people law enforcement would be diverting. We didn't know how full our classes would be. So we've just gotten to the 100th day in the program. And these are the earliest stats that we've got, who's complying and who's not.
I came from an area of the country here about 2 years ago where we had something very similar, and it worked beautifully.
Yeah.
So I am a believer. I just want to say what I wanted to understand or seemed like it wasn't being completely understood, and I didn't, is that it isn't a first offender, but if somebody.
But it's
is
only
on
that
a
offense.
marijuana offense.
That's right.
If there's a warrant on them at that moment, if they are breaking probation, if any of.
If they're on bond.
Other circumstances.
That's right.
They're not going.
They're going to
into the
jail.
divergence. But they will be diverted if it is not, if there's nothing else standing on
That's
that
right.
person at the time. So they're given an opportunity,
To go to a class.
and what you're looking at right now is, how does this work for us? And once we know, where do we cap
Then we'll
it?
modify the
Do we let
program.
somebody do it twice? Is 3 times you're out? What is it? Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
We're going to look at recidivism. What I do know is that what we've been doing for the last 10 years is the same thing every year. 10,000 offenders a year. It's been like clockwork. It was shockingly consistent statistics, which made it easy to figure the money. So next we're looking at prostitution. What are we going to do with prostitutes, with buyers and sellers? Is anything going to deter? How are we going to work those cases up the chain so we get to their pimps?
There's a law in the books in the state of Texas that anybody who benefits financially from services involved in that racketeering should be punished. It's a law that has not been executed because there's been very few witnesses and there's been commerce impact on that. I'm asking you, would your office be willing to work with law enforcement to be able to bring even services that continue to be points of a racketeering ring for prostitution, continue to be a point where children are served and exploited? Would you go after, with law enforcement, the ability to take businesses, and even ones where criminals are coming from hotels or other areas where known practices of bringing illegal activities to that
So the
area?
easy answer is yes. It is a nuanced answer because these are lawful businesses and it's not criminal penalties you're suggesting. You're referencing the civil, it's called the Civil Practice and Remedies Code, and these are nuisance injunctions. And businesses actually can't be forfeited, but their electricity can be turned off. And the criminal proceeds from the crimes can be forfeited, but you have to tie them to crimes. And so the little cases that they make when they go into the massage parlors and they go into these places and they make smaller arrests or ticket the individuals, those become the basis and the foundation for these nuisance injunctions. And what Larry referenced at Haverstock was called a gang nuisance injunction. So legislators about 15 years ago said a gang itself can be a nuisance. And it can be on a property like a plague, in a public park, in a public housing complex, in a private housing complex, even a private house. And if there's so much criminal activity that it literally is a nuisance in the neighborhood, just like high weeds or mosquitoes or junk cars would be, only it's worse, it's criminal activity, you can actually shut the business down by turning off their electricity and water, or by enjoining the actual criminals, that's what we did at Haverstock, from returning to the property. And you can see that the inattention at Haverstock has led to more murders. So our community outreach folks are out there working with that community, because we need to see, do we need another injunction? Do we need to keep another 50 gangsters off the property who've been chronically victimizing the people in the property by slinging their dope at the school playgrounds and by all the other crimes that they do there? So it's a hybrid law that you're referring to. It's not actually a criminal penalty, and we have the authority at the DA's office to do it. But I think the use of those, you really have to balance it, because people, who you're suing are businesses. So there's got to be a clear connect for us to get involved through the police with criminal activity at that location. And it's almost got to be chronic under the statute to get the relief you're discussing.
Well, and I say that because just on 2920, there's an area where a salon is suspected and is being investigated for the prostitution. The owner of that salon has just purchased the foot massage business 2 doors down as well.
I'm interested, is the answer. And yes, if law enforcement's interested, we're interested. Yes, sir.
We have, out in this area, we have more than our share, I think, of the homeless situation.
Yes, sir.
And panhandlers that I've seen almost cause accidents because they're walking out in the street and they're begging for money. Our mayor, or Houston mayor, has just declared war on the 10 cities. Where are those people gonna go? Are you gonna get involved in that at all? I mean, that's,
Hey, I got news for you. You're already involved. They're in our jail. They're mentally ill. They're homeless. Treating them is the absolute, that's the worst environment, and it's the most expensive way. Ask the sheriff. Sheriff runs the largest mental health facility in the Southwest, and so none of us want what is basically a public health problem in our criminal justice system. But our government, local, state, and probably not federal, our local and state government have to address this mental illness problem with beds. It's a money problem. Our institutions are gone, and our mentally ill population that's homeless, that won't leave a property, or that's urinating or defecating out there in public, they wind up in the jail over and over and over. You pay $75 a day for them, unless they're mentally ill, which many of them are, in which case you pay almost $500 a day. We often keep them the full 6 months because they're not competent enough to understand why they're in the criminal justice system. And then we release them as incompetent on the last day as they were on the first day. Does this make good economic or public safety sense to you?
No.
Exactly. So the problems really are systemic, and they are going to require the chambers, I think, to collectively pull together and handle this mental illness, homeless problem.
What do you think the solution is for that?
We're looking at other cities. I know that in certain cities, the police directly take these folks to places that are sort of like the sobering center, and that they farm them out to different service providers there. And so where the crime is nonviolent, the person's mentally ill and may have had mental health treatment before, they can connect them with a service provider at a location like that. But absent the justice system, you can't keep them in it. So you want to pay to force the treatment, right? Or do you want to let treatment providers do their best? It's a real catch-22 for government, I think. And it's a real problem. We can fix it. There's solutions. But it cannot be fixed by your criminal justice system. But we can tell you it's a public health concern and you don't want them in your jail any more than you want people with a dislocated hip or a broken arm in your jail. It's not a very good place to treat unhealthy people, and it doesn't modify their behavior. And that's what punishment's supposed to do, is modify behavior. So we want to work with our communities. I can't thank you enough. I'm interested in the problems. If you have a problem at intake and a police officer says, I wanted charges, and the DA's office wouldn't take them, find out what case it is, email me, we'll look into it. Our system is definitely not perfect. It's a triage type system, but it's open 24/7. We're just very dependent upon the information that we receive at the scene to make a determination about whether a criminal charge is going to be taken.
On the diversion issue, are there any, other than the training, the class, are there any other consequences like the Clean Green program that they have to do some kind of community service, some type of true consequence other than just sitting and listening or not listening to something?
That's the consequence today. Clean and Green program is coming. Y'all want them to go do community service instead of go do a class, and that's what our constituents want? We can do that.
I would think it would be both. You have to do more, not less.
Well, and for every hour of supervision, you pay.
Well, we're going to pay consequences if we don't pay.
You are paying consequences now, so
Right.
it's all a balancing act about how you want your money spent. And what makes you safer? That's what intelligence and data-driven prosecution is all about. It's no different than a business. If that business was running at a loss and we weren't making the right widget, or it wasn't a quality product, then the business wouldn't last. And so you must be holding us to the standard of, does this make us safer? Is it provable? And that's what I'm looking at. Is it provable? I know that incarcerating violent people makes us safer. I'm positive. And it may not deter people, but it incapacitates them. And that's public safety. But you've only got so many beds. Yes, sir.
I agree with where you're going on the diversion program. I guess I liken it to, as the kids were coming up, tried to encourage them to watch how they're driving, because when you get that first speeding ticket, correct me if I'm wrong, if the kids get stopped again a second time, they've got that speeding ticket on their record, it's kind of looked at as a habitual thing. So I think there's going to be a certain degree of people where you give them this opportunity to stay off of that track that leads them away from a productive life and a job and all that other stuff, right?
Yes.
That's one of your thinkings.
That's the idea. I just think we're safer when we keep people in our workforce. We're making too many people ineligible for jobs.
And I guess the follow-up on that, if you're looking at the 80-20 rule in any business for looking at the problems, is your expectation that as you attack the more aggressive and violent crimes, that these other little things that right now remain at 10,000 a year would go down and not escalate? Is that what you're expecting to see?
That's a great question. In other cities, some have seen that result, that the more minor crimes taper a bit, that they're more age-centric, if you will, and that the system gets better at processing people for minor things. When it comes to violent people, dragnets are an ineffective way to go get the worst of the worst criminals in our community. Dragnets, where you kind of stop everybody who's going over the speed limit, you might get some dangerous people, but I think we're going to be better served with these units that are dedicated to reading the burglary robbery reports, doing the analysis that connects up the partial plate to the description of the guy, where we've got a camera in another area of town. We put it together, we find out who his support group is, we indict them all, and we go to trial on organized crime, and we put them away for 50 years. That's public safety.
Let's have one more. Anybody? Let's not. Let's all do it.